Hello everybody and welcome back to another festive tech calendar for 2023. I'm Ryan John Murphy, I'm a Microsoft compliance specialist, and in this video we're going to be looking at eDiscovery, but more from a practical guide of how to approach eDiscovery and how to use the eDiscovery Premium toolset. So let's take a look. So a little bit about myself before I go on. So I'm a senior compliance specialist at Microsoft. I'm a former MVP, and I also run a podcast called All Things M365 Compliance. And I run that with my co-host, Nikki Chappell, who most of you will obviously know. If you want to be able to follow any of the information that I share, there is my Twitter account here. There is my LinkedIn here, and there's also my website here where I just do blogs on and vlogs on all things M365 compliance. I've actually got a couple of eDiscovery ones up there also if you're interested in those. I also have a Microsoft Information Protection and Data Loss Prevention kickoff guide where I've essentially taken my experience of deploying these solutions and mapped them into a single PDF document. It's quite large, but there is a lot of information in there that I'm sure will be relevant for you, whether you're new to information protection or whether you're a seasoned professional. So what are we going to go through in this video? So as I mentioned in the opening, we're going to go through eDiscovery Premium as a practical approach. So number one, understanding the eDiscovery solutions. Microsoft does have quite a number of them, but let's break them down and see what's more relevant to yourselves. Then we're going to go through retention in eDiscovery. Now that might sound like a bit of an anomaly at the moment, but it's very, very, very important that you have the right retention schedule or retention matrix, depending on what terminology you want to use, to ensure that data is discoverable. Then we're going to go through leveraging the roles-based access control. So that's there essentially to ensure that you have the right permissions or the least amount of permission for whatever role you're executing or whatever role your team may be executing. And then we've got number 4, understanding compliance boundaries and regional exports. So again, very important if you're in a regulated environment to ensure that all of your data is actually kept within a segmented search and you're only bringing back the data that's relevant to yourself. And then we've got the number 5, the 7 stages of eDiscovery. Very good breakdown from Microsoft on how to understand eDiscovery Premium. And then we've got KQL, which is Keyword Query Language. So an essential component from my professional opinion on how to use eDiscovery and how to actually get those collections refined before you even get that data into a review set. And then we've got creating and managing cases, which I'll show you in the actual portal itself. And then I've got a couple of questions frequent questions that I usually get and the answers to them, which I'll share with you later on. So let's have a look through this. So as I mentioned prior, Microsoft does have a couple of, well, as you can see, 3 different solutions from an eDiscovery perspective or a content search perspective. So as we can see, content search is the first one there that's listed. Now, that is a very basic tool. However, I do know some customers that I previously worked with that will actually use this and take advantage of this if they're looking for single items. That being, if they're looking for a SharePoint site link that's come back as a modern attachment, this is a great way to get that actual file. So don't underestimate that content search is something that you wouldn't go back to, even if you're using eDiscovery Standard or eDiscovery Premium. I do think if you're using eDiscovery Premium, there are going to be times that I would recommend for you to use content search if you're looking for single item based searches. It is a great way to do that. So don't underestimate the worth that content search has. Then we've got eDiscovery Standard. Now, as you can see, it does have a couple of more ticks in the actual features and capabilities slide. As we can see here, we've got case management and place content locations on legal code. Now, I do see a lot of people using this, okay? Now, again, there's no wrong or right. It just purely defines what your business or what your eDiscovery optimization or your eDiscovery target operating model may be inside of your organization or your business. But eDiscovery, again, can be a great tool, but I always find specifically with the customers that I deal with, which are, in fairness, heavily regulated industries, that eDiscovery standard just doesn't give them that edge when they're wanting to provide that data to a regulator or to Ofcom or for litigation purposes. And this is where eDiscovery Premium comes in. Now you can see there's a plethora of ticks down that right-hand side when it comes to eDiscovery Premium. And again, not to labor the point, a lot of people will look at eDiscovery standard and think, oh, I can just do a search between dates, Ryan, and just dump the data out. Well, yes, you can, but at the end of the day, if you're wanting to be able to refine that data, whether it be at the point of search and additionally within the review set, eDiscovery Premium is going to be that tool for you. Now, you may say, well, why? Because my own professional opinion and my experience with working with eDiscovery Premium is it actually saves you costs monetarily, and it actually saves you time when you actually provide your custodians or your users, however you want to label them, an eDiscovery, sorry, I beg your pardon, an E5 license to use eDiscovery, okay? And again, the reason being is you need to, or you must refine that data before you pass it along and just not give a dump and donate, as we call it, where you're just basically dumping all the data out and donating it to a particular individual to sift through it. Now, lawyers are very expensive, and some of them charge hundreds, if not thousands of pounds, dollars, euros, whatever your currency may be, per hour to sift through that data. Now, when you actually take a logical look at the actual costings of going through that information, in comparison to what it would be of applying an E5 license to a particular user in your environment that would need it, the costs are actually significant when you look at it in the end result. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking, an E5 license is expensive. Plus, Microsoft does offer these bolt-ons that you can use, which I think today it's called the eDiscovery Premium and Advanced Auditing bolt-on. They are essential if you're wanting to do everything and all of the good stuff when it comes to eDiscovery. So let's take a look through the retention. Okay, so whenever I'm talking about retention, I often get a dispersed look from people when we're talking about eDiscovery. Now, as my slogan states there, if it's not retained, it's not discoverable. Okay, so it's essential for you to have the right retention policies and the right retention labels, however you're working it within M365 across your business. Now, if your business is global, obviously you're going to have to abide by different regulations in whatever region that you're operating from. And they could be data sovereign areas, for example, Geneva and Monaco. They could also be other regulatory bodies like financial, Sec 17 or FCA or whatever the case may be. Making sure that you have the right retention strategy in that particular region or that in your industry or within the actual data sovereign area of where you're operating is essential to being able to bring that data back. Now, as you can see, the main components that people use for collaborating is Microsoft Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. Microsoft offers retention for all of those workloads. Okay, so ensure that whatever you're working with or whomever you're working with, ensure that that data is retained accurately so you can discover it at the point of need. You would not believe the amount of places where I've gone to and they've just got a default policy across the board for all users in all departments. Now that might work for some scenarios, but for the majority that I've worked with, it does not. You're either in a position where you're hoarding data, so you're keeping it beyond the point of need, or you're keeping it beyond the point of the regulated states. And in the US, it's all data to do with that particular element, or in the UK, not getting rid of it after 7 years if it's personal data, okay? So, ensuring that you have the right amount of retention in the right areas, again, is essential to your data discovery. So next, let's take a look at roles-based access control groups, okay? Now, the eDiscovery Manager role is there for you as a starting point. Yes, you heard me right. That is a starting point. Okay, so the reason I say that is because, again, I do come from a heavily regulated industry where I've been working with a lot of companies, but what you would find is with the eDiscovery Manager role that Microsoft provide for you if you're added into that role, you can see all cases in the environment. All right. That is not something that the majority of my customers want. They want to be able to have a breakdown of those roles. All right. Now, as you can see on the right hand side here, we've got EMEA, which is the Americas, of course. We've got EMEA and we've got APAC. What we can do and what Microsoft provides you with the ability to do is actually break down those roles. So let me just give you a quick insight to what I've done here. So in the orange banner here, I've got full rights eDiscovery managers. Now, because you've made that a custom role, whoever's in that role is the only people that sees the cases that are created by that particular role. Okay. Now that is a good thing because you don't want that oversharing at times. If there is regulatory bodies or if there's internal compliance needs where all of your regions, or I've even seen it down to departments, need to be split out. So certain individuals only have access to that data within that particular department, industry, region, whatever the case may be, you can do that. In addition to that, the top two here are also good elements that I've found working with customers where they want a particular individual, and that can be someone from IT, that could also be someone from a different department, that could also be an outsourcing, or that could just be a first, second line eDiscovery investigator. They want those to be able to create the cases and add the custodians in. Now, they do that because they don't want anybody else or even the collections and reviewers to add more people in as they go along. It's so that they don't just bring in anybody they see fit into a case and they can manage it up front. Okay, so this is a good way to do that. A lot of people do not know that you have the extendability when it comes to these roles to pretty much build out whatever you like. There are some nuances, of course, because some of the permissions overlap to some of the other permissions, as we can see on the left-hand side here. So you can get a mixture of both if you're not too careful. And you know, as Microsoft mature these roles-based access control groups, they are thinking of expanding them out more and more and more. So you've got more and more granular control over them. So a great way to be able to split out those roles on dependencies of what a particular investigator does or where a particular investigator operates. Now let's take a look at compliance boundaries and exports. Okay, so anything in blue is a compliance boundary and anything in green is an export region. All right, so let me just break this down for you. Microsoft gives you the ability to build out what we call security filters. What those security filters can do is provide a search segmentation. All right, so what that essentially does is say, me as an eDiscovery investigator can only search for people that may have an attribute of EMEA or APAC or EMEA, depending on where you're working. So let's pretend just for now there's 3 eDiscovery investigators. I'm EMEA, then I have another person in the same team that deals with EMEA, and then I have another person in my team that deals with APAC. When we're building out compliance boundaries, I'm only able to search for people that have EMEA, the attribute assigned to them, or any of the SharePoint sites, OneDrive sites, obviously Teams channels and sites as well, to be included into that. All right. You can use multi-geo on the preferred data location, I beg your pardon, to bring those into that remit. Or there are some other additional configurations that you can go into, which I won't go into here, to also bring those search segmentations into place. That therefore means if I try and include somebody from APAC, it will allow me to pick that user, but in the return of the data, it will show that the data hasn't been returned. I'll just get an error saying that the information couldn't be downloaded. That is the expected result because I shouldn't be able to pull that data back. All right. The same goes if I was to pull somebody in from EMEA and vice versa. If somebody was running a case from EMEA and they pulled somebody in from APAC and EMEA, the user is there for collection, but you won't see the user's data. Now, if you're providing a search segmentation within that region, and additionally, there is a data sovereign area where it states that any search segmentation done in that region, the data needs to be exported to that region also. You can do that with the exports. What that means is that you can build an Azure Secure Blob storage in the background and then map it to that export. That essentially means, as you can see in the green here, if I was to run a compliance boundary from Australia and I had to have the data local to Australia when I do the export, it will allow me to do that. Why is that? It's because wherever the native tenant billing area is, the export will always go to that area. So if we say, for example, the main tenant was registered in Canada, then I'll be able to put a search compliance boundary in, but when I do the export would come into this region. But if you build out this Azure data secure blob storage and push it to this secure blob storage with the URL, then the data not only stays in that region from a search perspective, but it also stays in there from an export perspective also. So let's take a quick look through the 7 stages of eDiscovery Premium. Now, if anybody knows eDiscovery or anybody knows anything about the investigation piece when it comes to data, you may be familiar with the Electronic Document Reference Model, the EDRM model, which is essentially an American standardization of building out and executing eDiscovery searches. Now, Microsoft have essentially mapped eDiscovery Premium to that logic of that model, and here is how they've done it. So the data sources themselves, these are the locations: Exchange Online, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, even Yammer if you're using Yammer, and then where searches will be performed. So this is essentially you selecting a custodian, selecting a user, so they become a custodian, and then selecting the workloads or the application locations of which you want to investigate. So which are the ones that you want to run the search on. Then, talking about searches, we go through to collections. So this is the search being performed, all right? So collections include user, keyword, and data. The user being the user you want to investigate, as I mentioned prior. The keywords that you want to search for, so that's the actual search query itself. So let's take, for example, you want to look for anything between a date range and anything in Microsoft Teams and anything with a subject of eDiscovery Premium, okay? Then we've got the review sets. The data must be reviewed once a collection search has been performed. So this essentially gives you the ability to sift through the data that's been returned from that collection. Now, the review sets are very powerful. There is a lot of filters and options that you can use in a review set to filter the data down even more. And that's where your export can be chosen as well. Additionally, within there, you can actually tag data. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that anything that's pulled back in the review set that you want to continue to review or you want to tag, so somebody else from beyond your position, let's say the ombudsman or the regulator or the litigator, would need to be privy to that information, you can essentially tag it. So let me give you a quick example of what that would be. That could be anything from tagging a piece of data or an email or Teams chat, relevant or non-relevant, okay? And it could be relevant to the case that you're working on, and it could be non-relevant, all right? So when you're going through that data, you could say, oh, well, these 5 messages, the users or custodians that I have has brought back their information in that chat, but I know this has nothing to do with the litigation that I'm working on. So you can essentially just mark it as non-relevant, all right? There's a point to do why we do that, but I'll explain that in just a moment. Additionally, you can apply a sensitivity to it. I don't mean a sensitivity label. Well, I do, but there's a slight difference between the two. And what I can say is if I found an email and I know that email is confidential and shouldn't be seen by other eDiscovery investigators because it may be around their particular item, or it may include them or it may incriminate them into it, or I know that this is not relevant to the case, I can mark that item as confidential not relevant or confidential relevant. Or I can just generally mark items as public or non-sensitive and so on and so forth. The reason why customers do this is so they can push it into another review set. And that review set can be the actual data that you send over to the regulator, rather than having all of this data in there that's tagged that you know you do not need, okay? So a good tip for you there. Then we move on to communications. So if the HR or legal team wishes, they can notify the user that they are under investigation. Now, when I say wishes, there are some regions around the world that define you must and I repeat, you must ensure that the user knows that they're in an investigation or under investigation. Okay, Germany being a prime example. So Microsoft have given you the ability to do this. Now it's very clever because what it will do is you're able to send a communication, and if that communication is not acted on in a certain time, then the system will send another one. And with that, will escalate it up to a particular manager or data officer or whatever the case may be, depending on who you've mapped into that particular communication. So it knows that there is an investigation going, and it knows there's an escalation point. Now, if they do accept it, you will get an email back, or you will get a notification back, sorry, should I say, to say, here is what's happened and here who the users are that have already accepted the actual communication themselves. Then we go on to holds. This means that the data cannot be deleted by the end user. Okay, so a frequently asked question that I get is, well, what if the data is under retention and the retention is about to expire? Doesn't matter. Does not matter at all. If you apply a hold to that data is going nowhere. Nobody will be able to delete that data, regardless of what workload that they're in. As long as that workload is actually pulled into the eDiscovery case, they will not be able to remove the data. Now, there are a couple of ways of doing this, okay? There is what we call a static hold, is where you put it in from the data sources side. So as soon as you add the user in and they become a custodian, you can essentially say, yes, there's a little box that says, pull the data, okay? You simply just select that box, press OK, and it holds all the data. The second way of doing this is via what we call a query-based search, okay? Now, this is where you can type in a particular subject. So as prior, if we have an investigation ongoing, let's say we've called it financial fraud, and you know that there's specific terminology being spoken about, or a specific customer, or whatever the case may be, keywords, whatever, however you want to label it, you can essentially put that into the query builder, and the query builder will go off and hold all of the items that have that context to them, okay? Now, the hold itself is on by default. The reason I'm telling you this is because most cases initially won't need a hold on them, depending on what you're doing. So just ensure that if you're in the process of actually trying to piece together what's happened, and you've got quite a number of people in that eDiscovery case, that hold is going to be on by default. Now, you won't be able to delete that case until the holds have been removed. All right? So just bear that in mind. Great option from Microsoft, but can trip you up at times when you're first doing your initial investigation. Processing. So data undergoes processing to make it easier to review and analyze. Now, this is where you would find quite a lot of items that are password protected, or in my case, I've seen with other customers, have been encrypted with a non-Microsoft encryption tool. So if you're using a encryption tool on premise, it's a third-party tool or it's a custom tool that you're using to apply encryption, this is where you'll find those items, okay? Now, additionally to that as well, there are some limitations on document size, for example. So if you have a huge document, it might not be fully indexed. Here is where you'll find those items as well. Now, Microsoft does give you the opportunity to go to each of those items and run what we call an advanced index on them. So you can pull through all the data, or you can essentially just segment and isolate the ones that are password protected or encrypted and download those items and then run them through your on-premise solution to actually gain access to them. On the exports, the data can be exported locally to a device or can be exported to an Azure Secure Blob Storage. So again, this really depends on the compliance that you have running against internally or the regulation that you're working towards. So we have the option to export data locally. What that means is, as me as an investigator, as soon as I go through and I press export, that file will then be pushed to my local device, okay? And I'll be able to access that information. But if you use this Azure Secure Blob Storage, which I always recommend if you're using eDiscovery Premium and you're under a regulatory body, to push that data to a secure blob storage. And it is worm. So it's a write once, read many, okay? Now, be cautious, because I have had some customers that run a lot of eDiscovery cases, and some of them they're just found to be Non-relevant, or they realize that there is no push through with this particular case, and they've just left the data there. Now, obviously, there's an Azure blob storage in the background, and it will increase depending on how much data you push out to it. Okay, so always ensure that you have your house tidying in play to make sure that that data is just not growing and growing and growing, because your Azure infra guys are not going to be happy, because there's going to be quite a big cost towards that as well. Okay, so that's the 7 stages of eDiscovery. Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this slide first and foremost, because collections can be quite complex and they can be quite confusing at times. So as we've got here, we've got number 1. So create and run a collection estimate. You would not believe the amount of people that don't take advantage of this. So what that essentially means is, once you've run a collection, you have the ability to look at the estimate of the data that's actually been found and returned for you to publish into a review set. Now, before you do that, I would always advise people to take a look at that estimate. It is there for the purpose of understanding before you commit it to a review set. You cannot delete a review set, so the last thing you want is a number of review sets that mean nothing to you, because the collection that or the search query, should I say, that you've published into the collection is not as accurate as you thought it would be. Always ensure that you go through it first and foremost. Number 2, review estimate and statistics. Look through all of those statistics. Look at the hits and the locations and the items and the users that you've added into that case to decipher who has the most hits and where the most data that's relevant to the case is stored. This will then help you in the review set to start filtering down on those users and on those workloads that have those hits that are high numbered. Number 3, revise and rerun a collection estimate. If you're ever in a position where you've committed it to a review set and you've found out that there's more people involved, or there's less workloads involved, or there's additional information involved, or there's a longer date span involved, go and revise the collection you've already created. You do not need to create a collection and review set for every time that you find a revision in there, okay? Again, not to labor the point, the last thing we want you to be doing is having lots and lots of collections and lots of review sets, and the majority of them meaning nothing to you. Number 4, commit collection estimate to a review set. Once you're happy, and I repeat, happy, that the data that you've collected and the query that you've used has been able to refine exactly what you need, only then should you commit it to a review set. The reason being, as I state, you want that review set to be as lean as possible. You want that review set to give you everything that you need and nothing more. Okay? Number 5, review collection overview. So again, being able to go through that prospect of all of those stages and understand, where am I and what is the data that I've got back. I do find more often than not, people will just create lots and lots of collections, lots and lots of review sets. Okay, I mean, that's great if you're doing a first initial investigation and you're not really sure what you're looking for or who you're looking at, just to filter that data down. But once you've got to that point, always ensure that your search query is refined before you commit it to a review set, because going through that data in a review set is going to be so much more easier and you'll get less out of it. It saves you time and it saves you costs, especially if you're doing a dump and donate of this data to somebody else for them to go through from a legal perspective. All right. Now, let's take a look at keyword query language. Okay. Now, keyword query language, KQL as it's known, is a syntax for searching data in Microsoft Purview eDiscovery tools. It allows you to use keywords and operators such as and or, very important, and I'll come to that in just a moment, to filter and refine your search results. For example, you can use the and or operator to find items that contain both terms such as apple and banana. You can also use the near operator to find items that contain terms within a certain distance of each other, such as apple, near 5, banana. Okay, so as you can see from the bottom, I'll give you a quick introduction to what KQL editor does. So I'm looking for anything to do with Project Falcon, and that's my keywords that I'm looking for. But where am I looking for those in? So I'm looking for them in kind docs, which is documents, or kind email, which speaks for itself, or kind IM, which is instant messaging, so that's your Teams chat, or kind meetings. So that's anything to do with meeting invites, accepted meetings, so on and so forth. Then we have an and. So we're looking for all of the above and anything that has a file type or a file extension of docx or XLXX, so Excel spreadsheets, and contains the word IPO near financial. Okay, so we're looking for a whole ream of stuff, but more importantly, we've really narrowed it down to ensure that we're looking for specific things. And we're using the KQL editor to do that. So that is the language that allows us to refine that collection, search query, before we commit it to a review set. Now, the good thing is that if you're using the card builder that's available to you to build this out, you can always go into the card builder, build it out, click on the KQL query editor, and it will show you the actual KQL query that you need to use. So if you're new to the language, that is a great way of beginning to understand what the KQL query language is about and how you can actually go through and build out complex queries and refine them before you're actually committed to a review set. So let's take a quick look at creating an eDiscovery case. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of experiences from my perspective, okay? So what we can do is we can add in the name of the actual query, the case itself. All right. And in my example, I've named this Collab Days for my previous demo at Collab Days. And then we've got a description. Now, what I've found, which is good for people to understand if they're new to this particular case or they want to keep a runbook of this particular case, is adding in the version descriptions here as well. So as you can see, V1, I've got customer names, and then version 2, I've got added Ryan John Murphy, and I've got version 3 added Hold to Adele and Megan. This therefore gives you the ability to keep a slight runbook on what you're actually doing with that case. This is good if you're working with the tool day in, day out, and you have quite a number of investigations open. The last thing we want you to do is be using this tool and then go on holiday for 7-10 days or bring somebody in because you're going off on mat leave, whatever the case may be, and them not be able to understand, or you not be able to understand where you left off before you went on leave. Okay? This again has been a valid point for us to use with customers because you do find that people come back and be like, I don't recall where I'm up to on this particular item. Then we've got the number. Okay, great. I haven't been anywhere. I haven't worked with any customers that don't have a particular reference number for their eDiscovery cases. Okay, again, Microsoft gives you the ability to add this number in. Then we've got the case format, as you can see here. All right, new and recommended. And then we've got classic. This format will be deprecated soon. So it always defaults to the new format. Absolutely the best way to go. This will give you a lot more than anything else would when it comes to the classic one. Okay, so that first and foremost is how you go through creating a particular case. The next step that you will see is creating a case and then the members piece. So you've got member and settings up here on the left hand side. Okay, so we've got team members, users, and groups. All right, now the reason why I'm wanting to show you through these static slides at the moment is because they're very important for you to be able to make sure the case is accurate for you. So the users at the top, I will sometimes find if people are new to this tool, they will try and add the users in that they want to investigate. That is not the place to do it. Okay, this is the place to add in the admins / investigators that need to be a part of this particular case. Okay, but we would always suggest, as you can see here, building custom roles-based access control groups to host people that are working on eDiscovery cases. Okay, so as you can see from my option here, I've got custom eDiscovery manager. Now, the reason for being this is because you can have particular users working in these groups, but if you have users assigned as an individual, as a single entity, I have found with my experience that sometimes when people leave the business, they're left in these cases. Okay, you don't want that. You want as much auditability as you can get with such a powerful tool. Okay, so let's take a look through the search and analytics piece. Okay, So this is where you can refine your thresholds, okay? So as it states, reduce duplicates and link email threads. You've got a similarity threshold, okay? Then you've got a minimum word count and a maximum word count. So the similarity threshold essentially means that if it's finding what we call near duplicates, we're going to go to a 65% value. So anything that matches a particular document or two documents to 65% of that positive value, we're going to bring that back, and we're going to be able to run additional queries inside of the review set to map them through as near duplicates, okay? Now, again, in my experience, I've seen people whack this up to like 90-95%, and I've seen people reduce it right down, so they're actually getting a lot of duplicates through that, and sometimes it can actually make your review set a little bit messy. So have a good read up of the documentation on this, because this can be highly valuable but highly problematic if you do not get that threshold correct, okay? Microsoft leave this, and it is default at 65% because that seems to be the actual sweet spot from what we've found when it comes to customers and the duplicated data. Then we've got minimum word count of 10. So this essentially means any document that has a word count of less than 10, it will not be brought back, okay? Now, anything to 10 and over, of course it will do. There are going to be some documents, or whatever the case may be, where less than 10 have been used. You can essentially just come in here and change that value to go on and actually do an investigation on those particular items, okay? Then we've got maximum word count. Now, this again can be fine-tuned to whatever you need it to be, so just know that Search and Analytics provides you that tweaking, if you like, to map those thresholds into whatever you need them to be for that particular investigation. These can be changed after the fact as well, which I'll show you later on. Then we've got group items by theme. Okay, great. This is excellent from Microsoft. This is a really, really good opportunity to actually pull in some of those themes. So we've got maximum number of themes 10, add numeric identifiers to themes, automatically set maximum number of themes. So this essentially means if it finds anything that has a theme against it, whatever that theme may be, you can bring that through to the review set and have that numerical value on the left-hand side to understand that they are a grouping. They are a grouping of information because it's found a theme within them, okay? Then we've got text to ignore. A lot of people seem to ignore this, no pun intended, because they just don't see the value in it until they actually start using the tool to its full potential. Now in here, you know, I find a lot of customers that use this to exclude any business related data or email signatures or any numerical values that are close to what they're looking for. You can come in here and exclude them out. All right. Then we've got OCR recognition. So we've got low accuracy and high accuracy. So what that essentially means is there's any text found in an image and that text is from your query, the Microsoft toolset will bring that back. It will discover it and bring it back. By default, it's actually set to low accuracy, which is the fastest speed. But if you want to be able to go through everything with a fine tooth comb, then high accuracy is going to be the better one to use. But do know, OCR timeout is 60 seconds. The majority of the time, that is enough for you to get that data out. But I have had cases where it's timed out and not actually gone through the full image itself. So do know you do have the option to put that up to 120 seconds should you need to. Okay. Now, this is the area where you add the data sources in. So if I just take you back to the earlier slide when I was going through the 7 stages of eDiscovery Premium, and I mentioned the hold, this is again where you can start to look through and identify the custodian, apply the hold settings, and then review. Okay, so when you select a custodian, you simply need to type a minimum of 3 characters to get the mailbox list. This is essentially because in the background, as working through, it's connected to Azure Active Directory. This will then pull through any users that start without those particular 3 characters. This is essentially for you not having to be able to pipe in the SMTP address or the user's full name. Because let's face it, if you're working through and adding a number of users in here and making them custodians, it can be a bit of a tedious task to do that. Below that, we've actually got LeBron James's workloads. Okay, so expand each custodian to view and add locations. This is where you can find any data that you're wanting to review on that particular user. Okay, so we've got the mailbox at the top, and then we've got the OneDrive. These are always returned. These are always returned to you as a default value, as it states in the brackets. Okay, this then gives you the ability to do searches against those. Then we have Exchange, where you can pull in any additional Exchange mailboxes that are of interest or the user has access to, distribution groups, maybe they have send as on particular mailboxes, maybe they're in a shared mailbox, something like that. Then we have SharePoint, which I'm assuming speaks for itself. You can pull in any SharePoint site. Then we have Teams, so you can pull in the Teams channel as well. And then we have Yammer at the bottom. Okay. So when we're talking about SharePoint and Teams, we can see that it brings back all of the SharePoint sites in my environment, in my test environment. I only have 47 of them. That's because at this point in time, the tool set's not mapped into any permissions that the user has when it comes to SharePoint, because SharePoint is not custodian bound. Okay, so you will simply have to come through here and select the SharePoint sites that are of interest for you to do the investigation on. Teams is different. Teams does have an association to the Azure AD account and the permissions in the background, and will therefore pull through any Teams sites that the user currently, I repeat, currently has access to. Now, the good thing about this is, as you can see, I have 2 US sales, which are marked by site and mailbox. The solution is clever enough to know that there's a site and a mailbox mapped in. Before this was an option, a lot of people would choose one of the items, not realizing there's an additional item and therefore missing data out. So this is a great introduction from Microsoft for you to be able to be so accurate with your investigation on mapping those workloads in to make it easier for you as an investigation. So most of your time is spent going through the data rather than building the case. And again, as we can see with hold settings here, it is on by default. You may not want that, so you simply just click the top box and it removes all the holds. All right, so moving on to collections then. So as I mentioned before, everything needs a name. Once the name is committed, you can't change the name. But again, when it comes to adding the collection in, make sure it's marked up so you know what it is. You know, don't just put number 1 or collection number 1 or whatever the case may be. Add some context to it. There will be times where you're running lots and lots of collections, and you'll get to the point where you're thinking, well, which one am I on now? Or which one of them gave me the information that I was looking for? There are times that there are customers that I use that have collections defined on users or collections defined on workloads. So they'll split them out into those particular different areas. They'll segment them so it's easier for them to go through the review set rather than having everything in one single review set. Again, this makes it easier for you, as I've noted underneath, to have a version on and where I've got all custodians, all locations, and all criteria, because this is my first initial findings. But as you work through eDiscovery Premium and start to understand the tool or start to understand the case that you're generating, you can actually start to go through, as I mentioned previously, to ensure that the collections are more and more refined, so your review sets are more and more refined. As you do that, ensuring that the name and the description is mapping back to what you're doing at that time is such a better way of working. Now, additionally with collections, you have the option within the collections to add in additional data locations. So let's take a look at these just for a moment. So we have choose custodial data sources. These are the people whose content you want to search to gather evidence for this case. Most custodians can be added later. You can also choose what locations you'd like to make available to search. So this is here, and in my experiences, is primarily used to map in locations. So where we had before LeBron James and we had his mailbox and his OneDrive, this is an option. This is not saying that this is best practice. This is just an option that I've seen from customers. They will do that for most of the users and not add in any SharePoint, Teams, or Yammer. They will then come into here and add in additional locations, as you can see from the 2 options there, so they can separate out the workloads to the users themselves. Now that makes it easier for them and the processes that we're working in the background, or even their target operating model when it comes to eDiscovery, but it purely depends on what you do as a business. And that, as you can see, is done by choosing on the custodial data sources also. So just know, you do have the option to separate them out. If you want to be able to keep your SharePoint sites, team sites, group mailboxes separate from the data in the review set or the collection that you're working on, you have the option to do that within here, okay? Being smart with the way you build out your cases and collections and review sets will certainly save you a lot of time in the long run when it comes to that review set, or even when it comes to the data export itself. But let's take a look at the options this gives you. So we've got additional locations. So as you can see, we've got Exchange mailboxes, and underneath this, we've got Microsoft 365 groups, we've got Teams, and we've got Yammer messages. Under SharePoint, of course, we've got OneDrive, group sites, team sites, and Yammer networks. We also have the ability to pull in Exchange public folders. Now they do have them in modern public folders, which came in with Exchange 2013, but I would imagine, or I would hope, most people are on those now, if not all. Okay. So again, not to labor the point, if there are additional locations, and I mean locations, not users, that are of interest to you for that particular investigation, here is where you can pull them through. And then at the bottom, we've got additional search options. Now, to turn on the ones that are grayed out, you need to select the Exchange mailboxes at the top, okay? That therefore gives you the additional options to pull in guest mailboxes, which again may be essential to your investigation. And then we've got a very important one, which is included departed users, inactive mailboxes in search scope. So if you're not able to identify any particular inactive mailbox or departed user, you can simply come in here and select this option. It will go through all of them. I repeat, all of the departed users, unless you specify them in the earlier configuration when it came to the data sources. Okay, so just be wary of that. Now, collections. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive when it comes to the query builder, as we can see on the left hand side and here in the middle, and then the KQL editor at the bottom. So the query builder itself has a plethora of options, to be perfectly honest with you, and a plethora of queries that you can actually build out, and options that you can actually build out for pretty much, from my experience, any scenario that you're working with when it comes to the investigation itself. So as you can see here from an options perspective, we can have essentially just click on these items here, okay? And then we're brought up with the filter that's from the left-hand side, any of these particular options that we're working through. So as you can see from here, we've got keywords equal Project Falcon, and we've got sender equals any of the two people. Now, obviously that's going to look for anything that has a keyword of Project Falcon, but it's going to look inside of Adele and Megan's items. Messages, emails, documents, so on and so forth. Additionally from that, we've got the KQL editor. So once I've selected this and built this out in the card query builder, we've got the KQL editor, like I said prior, gives you the information that's from the query builder at the top and pumps it into the KQL query language, okay? The keyword query language, should I say. This then gives you the ability to start understanding what the KQL editor is there for. And additionally, allows you to speed up your queries. Because if you can simply type that out, or you have a repetitive motion to keep a particular search criteria and you run it against most people for whatever the case may be, then you can simply just come in here and copy and paste it in. Okay, so a good tip, if you're building out the query builder, ensure you take the content from the KQL editor to speed up your future cases. Now, as I mentioned prior, when we're working through the collections, we'll get to a point when we need to publish that data into a review set. So we can see at the top here, commit items to a review set. Again, you want a good naming convention. Not using review set 1 as my option shows here. Have that review set as your initial review set, or review set and the date, or review set and a particular name, or a workload, or a case number, or whatever the case may be. Make sure it's descriptive enough for you to understand and for anybody else to understand. Because as I say, there's going to be times where you have lots of review sets and collections in your environment. Now, moving on from that, we've got the retrieval piece, okay? So there's a couple of options here that, again, that you need to be aware of. So the Teams and Yammer conversations collect up to 12 hours of related conversations when a messaging match occurs. So that essentially is bringing back those communications for that 12 hours, okay? So you can essentially bring it up to date as much as you want to. Then we've got cloud attachments, okay? So very important. Any cloud attachments that have been executed, shared, or whatever the case may be, you can now bring them back and you can understand what those links are for and then map it back to the items in the background, like the documentation and so on and so forth. Then we've got all document versions. Now, this can be your best friend or your worst enemy. So ensure you use this where you need to, because this will literally bring back every document version. So if you have a document out there that has 500 versions applied to it, this is going to bring back 500 versions. So ensure that you use this lightly. And again, this is why we see multiple review sets and collections being built out. Then you got partially indexed items, which I've left blank because it is blank by default. And this essentially means that any partially indexed items, which in most cases you do want ticked, they're going to be brought back. Okay. If it doesn't bring your partially indexed items back and you're wondering why, you might want to come in here and just start to understand that a little bit more. Okay, so you've got the data and review set, all right? And a few tips in here for you. You have the time zone up here in the left-hand corner to understand the local time or UTC. So if you're working with data that has a different timeline that's spread against it, you can actually come in here and start to map it to the timeline that you're interested in, depending on where you're operating from, of course. Then we've got the filter here as well, which is a very powerful tool inside of Microsoft because it gives you an enormous amount of information to work with, okay? These here are just a very, very short bunch of samples. Then you can start to work through and start to understand what you want to go through. So we've got file class here equals document, and we've also got the KQL editor in the filter as well. So if you are quite good or you are good or privy to KQL, you can start to build out the KQL operators in here as well to start refining that data set. We've also got the metadata here as well. So again, there is a lot of metadata that Microsoft provides for you to be able to search through. And now you have this handy search box at the top. You simply just type in, and there is a web page from Microsoft on Microsoft Learn that gives you all of the metadata fields. You can simply just type in at the top and it will bring it back. Additionally, you've got the ability to edit some columns. So if you're seeing something that you was more interested in or you wanted to have a bit of a deeper dive on, like the created time of something, again, there are many, many options in here for you to be able to use. I have seen, in some cases, people trying to filter out within the actual view pane itself without realizing that all of these options are here for you and available to you, so you can do that with some type of automation or some ease, or lots of ease in some cases from what I've seen, to actually start to filter and refine that data down that you have in the review set. Okay, so taking a look at tagging then. So managing tags. Now you'll simply need to come in and create some tags yourself, which I'm not going to go through in this session, but I just wanted to give you the options here, or the visibility to understand what those taggings are for. So again, as I mentioned, when you tag an item or when you've built some tags out as it shows at the top here, you can add in any terminology that maps back to your reference or your company reference if you like. You now even have the ability to create tags out as a template. So those templates are available to everybody in your environment when they're an eDiscovery manager, and they have the ability to do tagging or the permissions to do tagging. You simply find the item of interest, you select tag, and you choose the tag that's relevant to that particular item. You will then see on the right hand side all of the items that have been tagged, and you can actually go back through to the filter and then filter on the tagged items, making it easier for you to understand which items that you've tagged, and additionally using the filter of all the tagged items to publish it into another review set, so you have a clean review set or a master review set as it's sometimes called, which makes it a lot easier for you to understand and sift through the data. Again, additionally with the review set, we have the ability to do redactions. Now, no investigation is privy without a redaction. So we have the ability to do that within here. So we can see that we have the annotate, we select an item, come through to the options at the bottom here and go to area of redaction. And then we simply select with the item, pull over the data that you need to be redacted, and it will simply just redact the information. And then at the bottom, very important for you to remember is you must commit the redactions to PDF before you export the data. It simply means that the redaction we've got above is published into a document and therefore kept for the purpose of that particular item, okay? That is something I find a lot of people don't know or a lot of people forget to do. So it's essential that you do that before you export the data. And that's it for my video today on eDiscovery Premium, a practical approach. I do hope that has been some help to you and advantage to you. If so, please leave me a message or please leave me some feedback in the channel or get in touch with me on one of my socials. I'd be very much happy to hear from you. Have a good Christmas, enjoy the holidays, and I'll see you again next year. Thank you. Goodbye.